Hi, my name is Chase Benedict. What we're going to go ahead and talk about is nonverbal learning disability, or NVLD. One of the ideas of the myth that we'll talk about is whether it's hard for them to fit in or they just don't try to make friends at all. With NVLD, you develop things that are like visual spatial awareness or higher order comprehension, social communications. Basically, you have issues with those where you're not able to pick up on people's social cues or facial cues or subtle hints in such as humor. Those things aren't able to be picked up as easily as a common person would encounter, I suppose. The other part is executive functions. They're not able to organize things very clearly, or they try to and then still mix it up somehow, and they just continue to struggle to comprehend or organize them into a proper order. So one of the things with that persists, that kind of gives some weight to the myth of that people with NVLD don't try to make friends, or they struggle to, or they just don't even try to fit in, would be visual spatial awareness. That means they really don't know what may be going on around them, or they become they become too close to people, like physically, so they're invading people's personal space, and they don't really have an idea of what it means to be too close, or if they are to people, which makes very awkward encounters happen. People will start to find them and label them as creepy, or kind of develops a stigma around it where they just don't want to be around that person. Then you have social communication, the social cues. If someone can't pick up on a subtle hint, especially around middle school, where these things are started to really show up, people kind of ostracize these people. They don't understand, like, why aren't they getting this hint? Why aren't they understanding, what I mean, or why can't they just read between the lines? People with NVOD cannot associate it very well, and they don't understand, like, there's a hidden meaning behind what you're saying, and they find that very difficult. As for how NVLD is, or what kind of researchers think that it causes, it is due to white brain matter damage, where it affects motor skills and comprehension skills. Excuse me. And it's not 100% fact. It's still very inconclusive in terms of how things are done, or basically what causes NVLD. It's just how people see others is not very. Let me rephrase that, I suppose. When it comes down to people who do have a non-learning verbal disability, you can have one, visual spatial awareness, social cues, the difficulty with math concepts. For that one, which I should have touched on as well, is basically when you hit into middle school, which is where most of this becomes apparent, is you're forced to make references to formulas or concepts where someone may not be able to do so because they struggle with it. And those math concepts create problems, and they're not able to fully understand what's going on, and usually just gets brought down to, oh, well, maybe I just don't understand the math. But it can show up as a concept of NVLD and one of the symptoms of it. But something that happens very commonly is that NVLD becomes misdiagnosed very often, because it very closely relates to other diagnoses such as ADHD or depression, anxiety, autism spectrum disorder. It very closely relates to it because of how each section is associated. People with it either end up getting bullied, especially because of it's a middle school where every single kid is starting to become more socially and socially aware and become more interactive with other people, and things become more mature around that time where people really want things to happen for themselves and want others, but the socially awkward kid may not be able to get it through. Non-verbal learning disability truly doesn't mean they don't want to be friends. It just means that they struggle. They may not get what's going on. You may have to spell it out for them. They may ask questions constantly just so they know what's going on. And it's easier to diagnose when they're young. But when they get older, it's very difficult to come back from, because you've developed years and years of failed relationships, failed communications, being used and mistreated by those that only want to do you harm. And it creates this situation where people just think they're off and don't know what's going on. They don't have a diagnosis. They don't know what's happening. And all they really want to do is to be understood, to know what's going on, to have something with them. And they don't. So they want to be understood. They want to fit in. And they can. Most of the time they're outspoken. They're funny. They're they're funny. They're outgoing. These people want to make friends. They're very social. They just may not get everything on the first try, or they don't understand what you mean. And if you just take a little bit of time, they'd be more than willing to work with you. But that can only happen when you're young. The older you get, the harder it becomes. And people with NBOD, although it's very difficult to diagnose and still relatively new and not a lot is understood about it, there are options. They're not, they're very friendly people. They're social. They love to make friends. They want to be your friend. They're not quiet. They're not running away. They just might need a little bit of your understanding and want the help. Or better yet, just to be understood. Non-verbal learning disabilities. It's not something that we can just brush off. They exist, and we should probably take some time to understand what's going on with them, rather than just label them. Thank you.